Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. So, jumping into episode 2, this episode is going to be all about Darth Maul. Not only his appearances in comics, but also his wider life, essentially, because most Star Wars fans, or at least maybe not as many now, but a large amount of Star Wars fans have only seen Darth Maul in Phantom Menace, and I think he has about 5-ish minutes of screen time. And then obviously a lot of people saw Solo and saw him appear in that, and then a lot of people are like, what happened? Why is he not in anything else? He's in a lot of other things, just not the main movies. So in this, I'm going to give basically a brief explanation on his life, what happened with him, his comic book appearances, the appropriate timelines, a little bit of Darth Maul facts, and kind of go from there. There will not be any people who listen to this who haven't seen all of the content. I'm not going to do any major spoilers. There's not going to be any spoilers for the Clone Wars or Star Wars Rebels, and also I have not yet watched Star Wars Clone Wars Season 7 as of recording this, so I will not be talking about any of his appearances in Season 7, although I believe at present he's not actually going to be appearing until the last arc of Star Wars Clone Wars Series 7, so I don't really have to worry about that at the moment. So jumping off into this, essentially one thing about Darth Maul people don't realise is that he actually has red skin and the black of his skin is actually tattoos. It's very common practice from where he's from, and he's actually from Dathomir. Now anyone who's played Jedi Fallen Order, the video game that came out recently, in that, Cal Kestis goes to Dathomir and meets the Night Sister who's left there, and then also fights several Night Brothers. That's basically what he is. He is a Night Brother. Now, on Dathomir, essentially, there's Night Brothers and Night Sisters, and Asajj Ventress, who's a character in the Clone Wars, she also comes from Dathomir. And essentially, they're a bunch of Zabraks. Now, Zabraks aren't only specifically found in Dathomir, but the Zabraks found on Dathomir are specifically Night Sisters or Night Brothers. That's basically where it is without me delving into too much complicated stuff to do with species. Now, there are essentially 4 comics that I was going to speak about today, although one of them is actually Legends, but it's one of those Legends ones which it fits in with the canon nicely, so I'm going to talk about it lightly more towards the end. So the main comics essentially is the Darth Maul run of comics, which was 5 issues, shortly followed by the Age of Republic series, which I have brought up briefly in, I think, episode 0. He has his own Age of Republic comic, and that is straight after the events of the Darth Maul 5 comic series. It references things in that as well, and then it leads on to the Phantom Menace. The Darth Maul comic series is 32 BBY, before Battle of Yavin. The Age of Republic Darth Maul is also 32 BBY, because anyone who is familiar with Star Wars will know that Phantom Menace is also 32 BBY. So the 2 comic appearances we get from Darth Maul before Phantom Menace are within a year of the events happening. The other 2 comics are both set around the Clone Wars era, which is between 22 BBY and 19 BBY. Both Darth Maul comics are actually more specifically in 19 BBY, but I'll go more into those 2 later. Now, essentially, of the Darth Maul comics, the Darth Maul main run, 1 to 5, is probably the one that I would recommend the most. You can get it as like a one-off graphic novel. It's probably the best Darth Maul comic, maybe, aside from Son of Dathomir, which is one of the ones in Clone Wars. It's my personal favourite one, and it gives a really good in-depth look into what Darth Maul was like just before Phantom Menace, because obviously during Phantom Menace we get so few lines of dialogue, and there's not really much of a personality there. He just looks badass and has a cool lightsaber, and there's not really much else you kind of get from that. So it gives a bit more insight into his character, and it has a narration to it, so you can hear what his innermost thoughts are, and how angry he is, and why he has such visceral hate for the Jedi. It's really, really good. Essentially, Sidious takes him to Malachor, and he basically inhales these ashes of some Sith, and he kind of sees this battle that went on where the Jedi basically massacred a lot of the Sith. So it's really interesting in that regard. And the Age of Republic Darth Maul comic, he basically returns to Malachor with Sidious, does a similar thing again, essentially inhales more ash, and has a slightly different vision. And also it references some of the events that happened in the first Darth Maul comic. Now, also in the Darth Maul standard comic run, the 5-issue comic run, within that as well, Darth Maul actually associates with two quite famous bounty hunters. One is called Cad Bane, and one is called Aura Singh. Both of them are in the Clone Wars series quite heavily, compared to a lot of the other bounty hunters. So if anyone recognises them, that's where they're from. Darth Maul also fights against a Jedi Padawan in the comic series, and it's a really, really cool fight, and what he kind of is thinking while it's all going on is really good as well, so really, really highly recommend that Darth Maul run. Age of Republic's a good one. If you're not that fussed on Darth Maul, but you're kind of interested in the other Age of Republic villains series, then I'd recommend buying the Age of Republic villains, which I think has got Count Dooku, Darth Maul, Jango Fett, Grievous as well. There might be someone else in there that I'm forgetting, but essentially that's a really cool comic collection of one-shots as well. And the Age of Republic Darth Maul, it references the first comic run enough so you can kind of get a gist of it, but I would recommend having them both together essentially. So now, essentially, in Phantom Menace, you see Obi-Wan cut Darth Maul in half, and most people assumed that is the end of Darth Maul. Now, in Clone Wars, Darth Maul does actually come back. I believe it's Series 4 that he comes back, because his brother, Savage Opress, who is also a Dathomirian Night Brother, he basically goes out, finds him, he's on this sort of trash planet and he's completely lost his marbles, and essentially he takes him back to Mother Talzin, who is their mother essentially, and she heals him, and then he basically takes quite an active fight in the Clone Wars. Now, one of the interesting things about Darth Maul in the Clone Wars is he becomes one of my favourite characters in all of Star Wars, because he has got such depth to him, and he has such visceral anger, while also being very intelligent and very clever, that he's just such a good, deep character, that you didn't get any of that from the Phantom Menace. So one of the reasons I would say to people I recommend the Clone Wars series, which is now available in the UK on Disney+, and obviously if you guys are in America, you've had it for a little while, one of the best things about it is the Darth Maul arcs. So from Series 4 and onward, it's some of the best storytelling within Star Wars, in my opinion. It's got some of the darkest moments, it's got some of the most hard-hitting moments, it's got some amazing lightsaber battles, and also there's a lot of history about Mandalore and the Mandalorians, which anyone who's obviously been watching the show The Mandalorian, you'll want more information on the Mandalorians, who are quite heavily spoken about and featured within the Clone Wars as well as Star Wars Rebels, and Darth Maul is heavily intertwined within them in a lot of ways, which I won't necessarily go into in too much depth here. So in the Clone Wars, he's active, he has some interactions with the Mandalorians, he fights Obi-Wan a couple more times, and then basically what happens is that Clone Wars series stopped at halfway through Series 6. Disney pulled the plug on it. And we never thought we were going to get any more episodes of the Clone Wars, and then last year it was announced that Series 7 would come back, and then at the time of this recording, which is towards the end of March, episodes are being released weekly on Disney Plus of Series 7 of the Clone Wars, which is reported to be the final season of the Clone Wars. Now, the reason I bring this up is because at the end of Series 5 of the Clone Wars, you see some stuff happen to Maul, and eventually Sidious gets his hands on him, and then from that point you don't really see him anymore. When they stopped Clone Wars Series 6 halfway through, what happened is there was something called the Clone Wars Legacy, which basically was a multimedia project trying to fill in some of the gaps of the episodes from the Clone Wars that never got to be made. One of those is the book The Dark Disciple, which has got a character called Quinlan Vos in it, as well as Asajj Ventress. She's quite heavily in the Clone Wars series. It shows what happened to them after Series 6 of the Clone Wars and why it doesn't show them in Revenge of the Sith and that sort of things as well. But also a comic called Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir was released. Now, Son of Dathomir basically starts right where in Series 5 it ended, where Darth Maul got captured by Sidious. It shows how he escaped, some of his interactions further with the Mandalorians, and then it goes on to show sort of where he goes from there and some of his still connections with the crime bosses, the Black Sun I think I mentioned, and some of the sort of he becomes very heavy in the crime world, essentially. He becomes like a crime lord. Now, Son of Dathomir ends, and then at that point no one sort of knew what was going to happen with Darth Maul, and then he just appears in Star Wars Rebels. Now that Series 7 of the Clone Wars comes back, that actually takes place after Son of Dathomir. So if you're watching the Clone Wars for the first time while you're listening to this, and you get to the 5th or 6th series of Clone Wars, before delving into Series 7, it might be worth collecting the Son of Dathomir comic to read into, kind of fills the gaps a little bit. And I don't know if the episodes that are due to be released in April are going to detail everything that happened in the Son of Dathomir comic. I do really recommend the Son of Dathomir comic. As I said, I think the first Darth Maul comic, which is the 5-comic run, that is probably the best one that Darth Maul's been in, but there are some excellent moments that are really important for understanding what's going on in the Clone Wars for Son of Dathomir, so those are the two that I would really recommend people pick up the most. Just to finish off the story of Darth Maul briefly, so Son of Dathomir happens, then he appears in Clone Wars, and in the book Ahsoka, there's a few flashbacky parts where she talks about sort of her battling Darth Maul, which is something we're going to see in Series 7 of the Clone Wars. And then in canon, nothing is really heard about Maul for quite a while. He then shows up in Solo. A lot of people, obviously, it surprised them a lot if you're not used to his appearances in Rebels and etc. He shows up and in Solo, and he is a crime boss. He is the head of all the crime gangs and that sort of thing, the sort of underground crime world. He appears in that for like a few seconds again, and then he basically disappears again. He then shows up in Rebels, and when you first see him in Rebels, he's basically down and out a little bit. I believe what it is, without spoiling anything and trying to kind of give a little bit of detail, is something happened and he's no longer a crime lord or whatever, and he's basically just hell-bent on trying to get revenge against both the Sith for abandoning him and still against Obi-Wan for his obviously initial failure, which caused all the events that happened to him since then. As I say, I really, really recommend people check out the Clone Wars series as well as Rebels. Rebels is absolutely amazing, and it's much more consistent. Series 1 to 4, it just slowly gets better and better and better. Clone Wars, it does generally get better. I'd say you can almost miss the whole of the first season, apart from the episode Lair of Grievous and the very last episode, because it continues into season 2. Clone Wars is a lot more about arcs of story, and there's just some arcs that are a bit weak, and the whole first season is quite weak as well. So it's a bit inconsistent, it throws a few people off, but Star Wars Rebels is a lot more consistent, and Maul's story in that is absolutely excellent as well. It is, I can't tell if my favourite arcs are in Star Wars Rebels with Maul, or if they're in Clone Wars, but I just love them. I think they're brilliant. Last little thing about Darth Maul in Clone Wars and Rebels, he is actually voiced by a guy called Sam Witwer. He was the voice actor as well as the model of the character of Starkiller from the Legends games The Force Unleashed and The Force Unleashed 2. So how Starkiller / Galen Marek, how he is actually seen in game is what Sam Witwer actually looks like. And Sam Witwer voices Darth Maul in the Clone Wars and Rebels. He voices obviously Starkiller in the Legends games, and then he also does a few other voice works as well. Sam Witwer also voices Maul in Solo, while Ray Parks is the body of Darth Maul, just like he is in Phantom Menace. And also Sam Witwer voices Emperor Palpatine in Star Wars Rebels, a little bit in some of the games as well, he does Palpatine. So Sam Witwer is quite heavy in the Star Wars world when you look into it. I just want to flag that up because Starkiller and The Force Unleashed are my two favourite things about Star Wars Legends, and one of my tattoos is actually of Starkiller. Anyway, swinging back to Maul, the last comic that I haven't actually spoken about is the Legends comic that I mentioned, and it's actually called Darth Maul Death Sentence. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because even though it isn't technically canon, from what I can tell at least, there hasn't been anything in the Clone Wars series which actually disputes what happened. So essentially, Death Sentence is... The way I read it is it's almost like 1 or 2 episodes of Star Wars Clone Wars, which never actually got made, but the story still kind of happened. It's basically just Darth Maul and his brother Savage Opress. They basically get captured by some Jedi and then they escape, and it's all this sort of thing. It's quite brutal, surprisingly. There's quite a lot of like aggression and violence in there. Nothing that's, out of Star Wars' standard sort of realm, but it does give a more of an insight into the more sadistic side of Darth Maul and also Savage Opress. So I'd say if you do see that comic and you're really into Darth Maul, it is worth picking up and checking out. But of all the comics I've mentioned, I would probably say it's the weakest, and also due to the fact that it is Legends, it's not specifically canon. So obviously there's no confirmation it explicitly did happen, even though in my mind it probably did, because the events haven't been contradicted by anything else. So really, that's more or less it about Darth Maul. Now, I will say that Darth Maul is actually more so called Maul in canon than he is called Darth Maul. Just for clarity, Darth is actually a Sith title. So if you're a Sith, you're called Darth something. Darth Maul, Darth Vader, Darth Sidious, Darth Tyrannus, lots of them. And when Sidious abandons Maul and gets rid of him, I believe it's around Clone Wars era that he starts calling himself Maul. I know for fact that in Rebels, I don't think he ever calls himself Darth Maul. I think he only calls himself Maul. So in canon, he is more so called Maul than Darth Maul. I've just been calling him Darth Maul in this because all his comics are Darth Maul, and also people understand Darth Maul better than if I just said Maul. So yeah, that's basically all I wanted to say with Darth Maul. He is one of my favourite characters. I think, especially in the prequel era, he is one of my favourites. He's one of my favourite villains, and I really recommend people check out Clone Wars and Rebels just to see how much his character grows from the basically bland, cool character, which sounds contradictory, but he's really cool to look at in Phantom Menace, but he's got no real depth to him because you don't know enough about him. He just kills Qui-Gon, then gets cut in half, and that's more or less it. So as an introduction, to repeat myself one last time, I'd say get the Darth Maul main run of comic, which was there were 5 issues of the comic. You can buy it just standard as like a graphic novel. I'd probably likely say get the Age of Republic Maul one as well, especially if you're interested in the other characters aforementioned in this. And Son of Dathomir is worth getting if you're really into the Clone Wars and things as well. But as I said, I don't know if Series 7 is going to touch much on what Son of Dathomir already did. By some of the events within there, I think it will, but I don't want to say what they are without spoiling it and things. But yeah, Darth Maul's a much deeper character than anyone would really first thought. And obviously, George Lucas basically killed him in Phantom Menace. He basically undid his death. And when Savage Opress finds him in Clone Wars and you see what's happened to him after being cut in half, it is pretty intense. It's a lot to deal with. As I said, he completely loses his mind. He's gone essentially rabid and he has to get healed to be able to be normal again, in air quotes, normal. But yeah, Maul's a really deep character. Really recommend people check out some of the more Maul-centric content because, well, this isn't the only reason, but I'm tempted to get a Darth Maul tattoo. But obviously, if you get a Darth Maul tattoo, people are like, well, he's only in the films for a few minutes. It's like, yes, but there's so much more to him. And that's all this podcast was meant to be about. Just before I go, I will say next episode, so next Saturday, I'm going to be doing an episode on C-3PO, which sounds like quite a weird thing to do because he's not the most exciting character. But there's actually a one-shot comic for C-3PO, which is how he got his red arm. It's also in the Lego Force Awakens game as like a side bonus mission. And it's told in a slightly different way in Lego because in the Lego games, although most of the events that happen are still canon, the dialogue itself and the way it is kind of told is obviously a lot more child-friendly and a lot more silly. So it's kind of like a half-canon in a sense, but the comic itself is explicitly canon. So the comic, as well as if you played the game, you know the general gist of why he got his red arm, but that's what I'm going to be talking about next week. That's about it from me then, guys, rambling on about Maul towards the end there. I really appreciate you guys checking out the show. As I said, this isn't the only podcast I do. I do have a show called Genuine Chit-Chat. I don't talk about Star Wars anywhere near as much in Genuine Chit-Chat. I just have different guests on each episode and talk about a wide variety of things. Chris and Dave of Comics in Motion have been on the show, as have quite a few other people on this sort of network, in a sense, group. Tony Farina, who does the Indie Comic Spotlight, has also been on Genuine Chit-Chat. He is probably going to come on again quite soon, so that's exciting. So yeah, that's basically what you can look forward to. That's the other place you can find me. As I said, Genuine Chit-Chat is found on all the usual social media places, at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter, and you can find it on Facebook as well. And yeah, thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate everyone listening, especially all the way to the end. And may the Force be with you.